Welcome to the Mass Effect Lorecast, the podcast where we explore the vast universe of lore behind the Mass Effect games. We'll talk about all the details you may have missed, ask the hard questions, and more. Spectres, welcome back. This is your next briefing. I'm just kidding. This isn't really a briefing. This is the Mass Effect Lorecast. I am your host, Tom, or Robots, and I am here, as usual, with... should I call you Kung Fu Kangaroo? Should I call you N7 Legend?
We can remind people. Yeah, I'm now going by N7 Legend for the purposes of this podcast, because as I mentioned last week, it was my gamer tag / online alias there for a while. Just before Legendary Edition was announced.
Yeah, so. Dude, we should go with it because that's a great name. So N7 Legend and I, Robots, are here for another episode of the Mass Effect Lorecast. You guys seem to have been enjoying this a little bit because we have 5 new 5-star reviews to read through, and we'll be doing that at the end of the show. So stay tuned for those. If you're one of those people who left a review on Apple Podcasts, thank you very, very much. We'll be reading through your reviews at the end. We've got a bunch to get into today. We're talking about the Rachni? Is that the proper pronunciation? Rachni? Rachni. Yeah. Okay. So the Rachni War, the uplifting of the Krogan. We're going to be getting into all of that stuff. We've got some really cool stuff in the middle of the episode. We had some people share their Shepards with us. So we're going to call out one of those today. All sorts of fun stuff to go over. So why don't we just get this started? Shoot some info at me. Like throw facts in my face. What do we got?
So last week we were talking about the First Contact War, and it kind of overlapped with the Rachni Wars because the moral of the story last week was don't go around opening dormant mass relays.
Yeah, and also you can pick your friends, but you can't pick your friend's nose. That's like an old person joke at this point. But yeah, don't go opening Mass Effect relays without, how would you know? I mean, I guess... It's closed for a reason, but how would you know that? How would you know?
I'm sure there's some details written in the lore somewhere there. I didn't happen to find any when I was researching this topic, but that is basically how the Rachni Wars start. So they start around, and this is the crazy part. I love this detail. We're going to go crazy right out of the gates here. So around the year 1. Current era. The year 1. The Citadel Council team of Solarian explorers opens a dormant mass relay to who knows where. They don't. No one knows where it goes to, but they're trying to chart uncharted space. Which is what you do with uncharted space. I mean, that's kind of the only thing you can do with uncharted space. Yeah. You chart it. And they're like, they have the authority to do so. They've been deputized by the council. So I guess no harm, no foul there. And they are scientists. But it turns out that mass relay leads to the Rachni's home system, which was previously unknown. And it's named Maskim Zul. I love this. Which is Sumerian for evil fiend. Evil fiend. Ancient Sumerian. That's awesome. Yep. As if it couldn't be more, creepy and foreboding. So, and this is, again, the home system of the Rachni. And the Rachni, if you're unfamiliar, are a hive mind insect species. They're very aggressive, and they run in colonies, and those colonies are controlled by queens in deep underground tunnels. So that's primarily how the Rachni evolved, in deep underground tunnels. And at the time that the Solarian exploratory team happens into the Rachni solar system, the Rachni are a spaceflight species, but they're nowhere close to the technological advancement of the Citadel races. There's no faster than light travel. I mean, they are giant bugs. I mean, these are basically Starship Troopers bad guys, right? Yeah, basically. And it's important to remember that they're giant bugs, but they're highly intelligent. They're smart, very, very giant intelligent bugs. Yeah. And very dangerous, too, and very aggressive. And so their homeworld, I think it becomes a little bit relevant later. Their homeworld is called Suin. And it's extremely inhospitable to almost all life because the planet itself is tidally locked. And what tidally locked means is that it's one side faces the sun, its star at all times, which is a red dwarf star. And the other side faces away from the star at all times.
Right. Our moon does this. Like a lot of people don't think about it this way, but that's why we are always seeing the same face of the moon, is because the moon is tidally locked to Earth. And in fact, any scientific body that spends enough time gravitationally rotating around any other body will eventually be given enough time that it doesn't crash into the thing or get flung off, will eventually become tidally locked. So this is kind of a natural thing that occurs, and I've pondered about this before. This is one of those things I talked with my daughter about, who I do the Fall Lorecast with, and there was a time where she was dabbling in writing stories and things, and I was like, what if you did a story about a world that was tidally locked, and one side of it was always in sunlight, and the other side of it was always in darkness? And how would animals evolve on a planet like that? Like, would there be different kinds of animals on separate sides of the planet that didn't even visit each other because they didn't want to go into the other side? Like, how does that even work? So I love that this is a thing in Mass Effect, because I find it a really, really interesting concept.
And I love the amount of research that the writers poured into Mass Effect, because you can tell that they conferred with astrophysicists and scientists and, you name it, a lot, because they got so many of the like physics and ecology and even geology, like those little itty bitty details that people might miss. They got them correct. But about Suen, it's tidally locked. One side faces the sun at all times. One side faces away. So one side is scorching and the other side is frozen and barren. And both sides are nigh inhospitable to all life. Yeah. So that's why the Rachni evolve underground, and they evolve in this area of the world called the Eternal Twilight Zone. And it's because that's the only habitable range.
Yeah, it's like the place where it's constantly like the sun is just at the horizon or just below the horizon. So you have a little bit of light all the time.
Yeah, and they forage underground thanks to the homeworld's subterranean rivers too. So that was a cool detail that I learned, that their homeworld has subterranean rivers, and you actually go visit the homeworld in Mass Effect 3. It's where you speak with the Rachni Queen, but we'll get into a little bit more of that later, because the Solarian explorers who happen upon this their solar system, they're promptly captured, and their ships are reverse engineered from element ezo research that the Rachni did on Kash-Shaptu, which was not their homeworld. So
Kash-Shaptu.
Kash-Shaptu.
Such a weird name.
For all of you listening, there's Kash-Shaptu is spelled with 2 iterations of SH. So that's why I'm enunciating that with some emphasis on the wrong syllable.
You can't just say Kash-Shaptu, because it's Kash-Shaptu all squished together. I've never seen a word like this, right? Kashshaptu. Kash. You have to take a breath.
I wonder
in the
if it's Sumerian. I do,
maybe,
because the name of the solar system is.
It sounds kind of foreign. I'm going to search this while you talk. This is supposed to be like a no thing to do while you're doing a podcast, is to Google things while you're talking. I don't know, because it breaks the pace of the show, or shows that you were unprepared. But I didn't think while reading through the show notes, I should Google this phrase. But now I thought about it. So go on. If I find something interesting, I'll let you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, go right on ahead, and I encourage anyone listening.
Holy crap!
Well, there we go.
It is. Third. Okay, so the first 2 links are Mass Effect stuff. The third one is a translation from Sumerian to English. You want to guess what it means? If you were to take a guess,
something bad.
Yes. It's okay. Something bad. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It has kind of a negative connotation.
Does it mean hell?
No. It means witch, or person who uses magic.
Oh, there we go. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay.
And that makes sense, especially because the Rachni use the element ezo research that they conduct on that planet to reverse engineer the Solarian explorers' ships. And that's how the Rachni achieve FTL capability.
Yeah.
So now this is a huge uh-oh moment,
right?
Because you have an extremely hostile, intelligent, powerful, and unknown hive mind species that has FTL access to Citadel space.
That's no good. That's one of those like, don't ever do this. Like, right?
Yeah,
if you were to make like an
call pest control.
Yeah, if you were to make like an intergalactic list of like, these are all the things you should never do, that would be one of them.
100%. Don't unleash highly intelligent, aggressive insect species on your friends.
Right. Don't ever, stand in front of a mass relay while it's shooting somebody through it. Maybe that's another one. I don't know what happens if you do that.
That would be like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy tip number 2.
Yeah, right. Always bring a towel. I'm sure there's some other ones.
Listen to the elevator announcements.
Yeah, right. Listen to the elevator announcements.
But yeah, they get captured. The Rachni achieve FTL flight, and the Citadel quickly tries to step in, and the Council tries to negotiate. And the Rachni Queen is unreachable. Please leave a message after the beep, because she's underground, and there are multiple queens, but all of them are unreachable. And all of the planets that they live on are hostile. So it seems that war is just unavoidable at this point.
What do you think her message on her answering machine sounds like?
Shrieking.
Shrieking.
A lot of shrieking.
Just horrible noises. Just...
Right, but they're the Rachni, so they would call it the sweet songs of their children or something like that.
Please listen to the sweet songs of my people and leave a message. But what you actually hear is just like terrible.
That's the worst dial back tone I've ever heard.
Yeah, right. So creepy.
And I've heard some bad ones. But so and there's another key detail about the Rachni. They are prolific breeders. And they have strength in any condition, basically. So this means that in the ensuing series of conflicts, the Rachni easily overwhelm the Citadel Council race's defenses. Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. There's not much that's actually written in the lore about the battles themselves, about the series of battles. And part of that could be, because the details have been lost to time, because we got to keep in mind this happened 2,100 years before the events of Mass Effect 1.
Right.
But not much is written. But what we do know is that the Citadel was losing almost every battle to the Rachni. So what is the Council then to do? Well, the Solarians have an idea.
And this is what we're going to talk about in the second half of the show. But before we get to that, here's a question. Do you think, based on your experience with the games, you've played through these games a bunch, you know many of the characters, many of the races very intimately, and some more intimately than others because you can actually romance them. But do you think that this information was removed from history for a reason? Like it was embarrassing? Like the Council was ashamed at their inability to hold back the Rachni? That somebody got rid of it?
I think it's entirely possible that the Council wanted to censor their own history for any number of reasons. One, they could have been embarrassed by their military defeats. I know the Turians, who are a Council race, would certainly be embarrassed by that. They are an autocratic, very prideful, militaristic society. They would not want that well known. The Asari, however, might be embarrassed at the total failure of diplomacy. Mm-hmm. They pride themselves on that. So that might be a stain on their reputation. And of course, the Solarians, that was a failure of intel on all fronts. And the Solarians do pride themselves on intel being their forte.
Right.
So intel, diplomacy, combat, all of it was a total breakdown. And then when you get to the later stages of the war and the things that the Council is forced to do to mitigate their losses and to slow the advance of the Rachni, the Asari really preach morality, but their actions and what they've condoned in holding back the Rachni would be at strong odds with that.
Right. Yeah. So knowing the way that, No, you've probably looked into history. Commander Burton in chat writes ancient Roman times, surreal. Like there are all sorts of wonderful connections to real world history and the way that these things play out, because that's oftentimes the way these kinds of things do play out. And knowing that there are patterns in history and those kinds of things, it would make sense for the council to remove information that the other races could use against them to oust them from the council. Right? Like if they can point back to, you guys don't need to be in charge, because remember when you messed up back here? And look at all this evidence we have for all the terrible things that you did that were the wrong choices because of the Rachni War. And they could actually show evidence to say, like, you guys suck and this is why. Then they could oust them from the council. So it makes sense that they would want to remove that information, control of it, like, and just look at our world and where we're going. Our world is very much about information and control of information and who controls the information. Look at recent elections, the use of misinformation. The people who control the information are the people who will retain or get power. And in that situation, even though it's 2,000 years ago in our time frame, for a lot of those races, like you mentioned on the previous episode, they're long living species. It's not as long ago for them. And it would make sense that they would want to control the information in order to maintain power. So I don't, and on top of that, they're an advanced technological civilization, or civilizations that have the ability to, faster than light travel and to, settle multiple planets or whatever. The idea that they would somehow just lose information because they didn't back it up, like that seems ridiculous. Like, wouldn't that be one of the bases for just, I don't know, the way your civilization functions is that you just make sure that you control information and that you're able to access it at all times? Why would it just disappear? It seems very suspicious.
And I'm glad that you bring up the concept of time being different for the other races, because as I've stated before, the Asari's lifespans are around 1,000 years. So even though this series of conflicts began 2,100 years before the events of Mass Effect 1, that's only 2 lifetimes for an Asari. So it would be roughly around, discussing a war that happened in the United States around the 1840s, 1850s.
Yeah, it's only 2 lifetimes of distance. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So like if the average lifespan is 70 years, that would be like us talking about the Civil War, which is still echoing in the way that we handle history today. So yeah, that's not actually that long ago. So yeah. Man. Yeah. And talk about disinformation. Like, we've had disinformation campaigns in our own country about the events of the Civil War. And even just look at the whole debate about statues, about Confederate leaders still being statues in specific locations and cities. Like, that's still a thing. If we had different information or a lack of information about what actually happened during the Civil War, then that debate would be very different. There wouldn't be as much information to say, well, maybe we shouldn't be having these statues here or whatever, either side, right? You would have less information, which means less of a leverage to get the thing that you want. Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I think that this is one of those things that I think sometimes happens and people think, oh, that's just lazy writing. They just didn't want to give us all the details. But no, this is the way history works. There are specific gaps of information. Look at the you go back not even 2 lifetimes ago. Look at the Nazi regime and the burning of books. Like, the control of information, even before the internet age, it was well known that was an important thing. You talk about Sumerians. You go back to Sumerians, and the Sumerian leadership was conquering the lands around that area, and their leaders were putting statues of their kings in these foreign cities in order to share the information of their kings being powerful, and writing the stories of their conquests in the rock on these other cities, so that people are reading these stories about how powerful this leader is, so that they don't rebel. Like that's how much information is important in human history, is that we've been using it for as long as, longer than this happened to go, more than 2,000 years ago.
And the Rachni Wars are kind of a precursor to a lot of morally questionable things that the council authorizes and that the council does. So, namely, one of them happens in the topic that we're going to discuss in the second half of the show, which is the uplifting of the Krogan. It could be possible that a lot of details are left out of the Rachni Wars because the uplifting of the Krogan is so intricately tied to it. And when you talk about the uplifting of the Krogan, you can't do that without discussing some of the actions, some of the very controversial actions of the Solarians and the STGs, Solarian Task Group.
Right. All right. Well, I'm ready to move on. We've got some really cool stuff in the middle of the show to get to, and then we've got the second half of this, and we've got so much stuff. So why don't we move on to the middle of the show? We'll be right back.
Message coming in. Patching it through.
I am sovereign, and this station is mine. I like the sound of that.
I love mixing these voices together to make them sound wacky. So we asked you last week to show us your Shepards, and we got a number of responses on the Discord, and we have one to share today. This one is... let's see, and also writers. I need to make sure that you know that too. If you have a writer you'd like to share, you're welcome to share that as well. So this is the episode. This is the part of the show where we say, hey, share your Shepards, tell us a little bit about them. And we were going to talk about on the show. We've got a picture here. I'm going to pull the picture up while you introduce our Shepard. So go ahead.
Right on. Well, today we are bringing to you Commander Jane Shepard, courtesy of Teacup. Teacup, if you're watching this stream, hello. And this is Commander Jane Shepard. She is an infiltrator. If you are unfamiliar with what the infiltrator class line is, it's very sniper and tech oriented, also with a little bit of stealth. In the later games, I believe that there's a cloaking ability you can get in Mass Effect 2 and 3 for the Infiltrator class. But think more long-range engagements, disabling enemies before they can get up close. The background for Commander Jane Shepard is Earthborn. As the Earthborn, you are born as an orphan, and you escape a life of poverty and crime on the streets by joining the Alliance. The psych profile for Commander Jane Shepard is Soul Survivor. Soul Survivor means that Commander Jane Shepard was on a mission on a cruise, and that mission went terribly wrong when a group of Thresher Maws devoured all 50 Marines that were with Commander Jane Shepard. She's the only one who made it out alive. Now, according to Teacup Shepard is a, quote, no-nonsense go-getter.
I like that.
I would love to see that in action. Teacup, if you want to send us some gameplay clips, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and Teacup's in chat right now. Hey, Teacup. This is your Shepard. You're the first Shepard we get to share on the show. This is awesome. Some other little details here. Almost all the way Paragon. About, what is that, 80% Paragon? Almost all the way. This specific image shows level 37, 407 health, full upgrades for pistols, tactical armor, electronics, decryption, and charm, with some other intermediate upgrades for some other things along the way. So very cool. And she's got a very short-haired, attractive woman with a little scar on her eyebrow. So cool stuff. You want to go over just real quick, list out some of the key decisions that she made?
Let's talk about what Commander Jane Shepard has done. Let's look at her resume, shall we? So, up number one, Commander Jane Shepard freed the Rachni Queen in Mass Effect 3. We will be talking about that a little bit later. So I did want to highlight that first. Jane Shepard also saved Rex in Mass Effect 1. She sacrificed Ashley and instead saved Kaidan on Vermeer in Mass Effect 1. She saved the Citadel Council in Mass Effect 1 and saved Malin's data on the genophage cure for Mass Effect 2. She saved the entire Mass Effect 2 crew during the suicide mission. So good job there, Teacup. That's no small feat.
Nice work, Jane Shepard. I didn't do that for sure. We'll get into my story about that in the future. I lost one person, but that person happened to be my love interest, which was a super bummer. It was super, super duper bummer. We'll go into that in the future sometime.
That happened to me as well. I think I lost Jack, and even before we landed. It was terrible. but Jane Shepard also she chose to save the collector base at the end of Mass Effect 2. So she did not destroy it. So she actually sided with what the Elusive Man thought in saving the base there. And then she cured the Krogan of the Genophage in Mass Effect 3. She brokered peace between the Quarians and Geth in Mass Effect 3. And she chose the destroy ending for Mass Effect 3. So that's my personal favorite. I like that. Not everyone will.
Yeah, right.
But I do. And she romanced Caden.
All right. Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, Teacup. That's awesome. Yeah, she says in chat, I barely fought anyone with that high charm. Yeah, that makes sense. So if you
can be useful.
Yeah, if you would like to share your Shepard with us, log on to the Robots Radio Discord and drop some details into our chat. There's all sorts of channels. You'll find the Mass Effect ones, or you'll find the Mass Effect Lorecast one in there. Just look around. You'll find some stuff. And you can find the Robots Radio Discord chat just by searching it. It comes up real easy, or you can click in the show notes. And also, during the middle of the show is our time to thank you guys specifically for listening to the show and for being here and for helping to support the show by sharing the show with your friends and leaving ratings and reviews. And we've got 5 new reviews that we will go over right at the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about some Krogans. Here we go.
Spit it out, or are you trying to build suspense?
You're so dense, sir. Obviously, I do not know as much about human relationships as I thought.
You're so dense, sir. All right, so let's see. We're talking about the Rachni. Now we're talking about the Krogans and a solution. What's this about?
So basically, at this point, the Citadel Council is getting their butt handed to them at every battle, and they can't keep losing like this to highly aggressive, intelligent insects, or else not much is going to be left. So their back is to a wall, and they have to find a way out. The Solarians come up with an idea. So the Solarians look at the situation. They see the prolific breeding. They see the overpowered, unwavering Rachni, and the extremely hard to occupy homeworld of the Rachni. And they say, well, what if we groom the Krogans?
What if we take another sentient species and use them as a weapon?
Right, and we can do it as a PR campaign and call it uplifting them out of the goodness of our hearts.
Perfect. So how'd that work out? And actually, let's go into the details first. Why the Krogans?
So they picked the Krogans because the Krogans are also prolific breeders, and because they're chosen for their hardy constitutions, their resilient anatomy. I don't know if you guys remember this, but the Krogans can regenerate organs like on the battlefield.
That's nuts.
So
they're like Wolverine.
They have copies. Yeah, they have copies of each organ too. I think they have multiple hearts. They have multiple livers. I know that. So yeah, they have a rapid reproduction rate too. Yeah. And so all of these are reasons that they're chosen as the candidate for engineering into like super soldiers.
Right. And they, like you said before, they proliferate very quickly, just like the Rachni. It's like kind of like bunnies, which is a good reference, being that we're recording this on Easter. Hey.
Never thought I'd be equivocating a bunny to a Krogan, but here we are.
There you go. They just lots of doing and making babies.
Oh yeah, and there's a problem though. There's a problem with the Krogan, and the problem is that Tuchanka is just a mess, and it is messed up. And this is way before the events of Mass Effect 1. It is a mess. It is totally irradiated from nuclear winter brought on from the Krogan civil war that happened. There are toxins all over the place, and there is a whole slew of natural predators that are just waiting to kill you. Mm-hmm. So Tuchanka isn't going to help foster some growth of some Krogan army. So the Solarians uplift the Krogans by giving them some advanced technology and moving them somewhere else safer. They also institute something called the Shroud, which is an atmosphere engineering piece of technology, and it helps to de-radiate. Is that the term? De-radiate
Sure.
Tuchanka?
Yeah. Remove radiation that's already there. Okay.
Yeah. So it helps to clean Tuchanka's atmosphere up a little bit.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize that the Twitch streamer Shroud was that instrumental in the events of Mass Effect.
I'm sure he didn't realize either, but he was instrumental in Mass Effect 3 as well, because the Shroud is also the same method through which Shepard and Morden can deploy the cure to the genophage. So, you live by the Shroud, you die by the Shroud.
Yeah, thank you, Shroud.
I like the poetic justice there.
Yeah. All right, so how does this work out? The Krogans now super soldiers. They've been moved to another location, and they're basically the Turians are the ones who did this, right? The Turians, is that right?
The Solarians.
The Solarians. I'm sorry. The Solarians are pointing at these big bug guys, and they're like, "See those guys? Squish them." And they're like, "All right," and they go squish them. Is that how this works out?
That was a good Krogan impression. I loved it.
I'm a Krogan. Yeah.
But yeah, they're more or less leave it to the Solarians to hatch a plan and then manipulate an entire species into doing their bidding.
Right.
But they're like, "Hey, go get them," and then they do. So that's pretty much how that works out. The plan works swimmingly, and according to the Mass Effect wiki, quote, "Within 2 generations, the rapidly breeding Krogan had the numbers not only to drive back the advancing Rachni, but the ability to endure harsh conditions of the Rachni worlds themselves," which is something that no other race could do.
Right.
So the Krogan eventually conquer all the Rachni colonies and reclaim the Citadel Council worlds. And again, the details of those battles are sparse, but what we do know is that the Krogans basically, kick ass and take names, and the Rachni refuse to surrender.
Yeah, and
that presents a problem.
All right,
because now we're in the Rachni's home system again, and the Krogans have pushed all the way there, and the Rachni refuse to surrender. So the Krogans carry weapons of mass destruction underneath the ground of Suin, the Rachni homeworld, and the explosions are so powerful that they blow up the nests, and the explosions are so powerful that sinkholes are created, and they exist for like thousands of years. They still exist during the events of Mass Effect 1 through 3.
Right. Oh, geez. Yeah, because weapons of mass destruction are always the right answer.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what I was talking about when I said that the Citadel Council might want to omit some details and kind of forget about this war because they exterminated an entire species.
Yeah, that's
all of them.
I mean, there's a word for that. Genocide, and it's not necessarily a good word. Yeah, that could be a little bit of a stain on your resume.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty bad. But to put things in, and I'm not saying that what they did was right, but what their thought was at the time, because they could not negotiate or even communicate with the Rachni at all. They thought that they were irredeemably hostile. So they were forced into that kind of scenario. And around the year 300 of the current era, the Rachni are declared extinct by the Council. And the Council hails the Krogans as saviors of the galaxy, and they reward them with Rachni colonized worlds. And this type of narrative should sound really weird to someone who's only played Mass Effect 1, because in Mass Effect 1, you kind of get this sense that the Krogan are like second-class citizens. Yeah. That they're like looked down on and dirty, and no one likes them, and they're savages, and they're brutal, and they're not war heroes. But that is indeed how they're treated right after the events of the Rachni War.
Yeah. That's a total bummer. I mean, yes, in some ways they probably saved a lot of lives, but at the same time, the solution to do it manipulated an entire species and destroyed another one. And is that really the best answer? Now, I could also see, being scared out of your minds that these giant bug monsters were going to come kill everybody and having to do something about it. But yeah, it's a rock and a hard place. And those make the best moral quandaries, right? Like if this was the only solution you had and you had to go with it, then maybe you go with it. But maybe you also actually respect the Krogans and have a PR campaign that makes them highly acceptable and loved individuals and regular, maybe you raise them to the status of being, part of the council, or, like you don't treat them like subclass citizens at the same,
yeah.
I don't know.
And the treatment comes post genophage. The treatment is, the genophage is something that we will definitely cover in a future episode because it's such an intricate topic. But the genophage is kind of created post Rachni War as a way for the Solarians to be like, okay, well, we don't need you anymore. And why don't, we don't want you to get too powerful now, because then you're going to want representation, and then you're going to want, more than we're willing to give you, which is the sad truth of the matter. The Solarians, the Turians, they were all threatened by the Krogan. And so they created this genophage as a way to sterilize nearly all of the Krogan population. Yeah. And it cuts off the prolific breeding rate by like 99.9%. And so it's such a rarity for any Krogan to survive childbirth, for the baby or the mother, that wars then get fought over inside the Krogan worlds over females. And so it destabilizes the Krogan race from within. Right.
And do you think that was 100% intentional, or do you think that was a side effect? Do you think it was the kind of thing where they were like, well, if we reduce they procreate so quickly, if we reduced it by like 80-90%, they would then procreate at a rate that's similar to other races, but they overdid it accidentally? Or do you think this was if we reduce this nearly 100%, it's going to destabilize their culture and they're going to fall apart?
I think in order to tell the difference between those two, you would have to care. And I'm not
sure think they even
that
cared?
The Solarian did. Yeah. Right. Because the Solarian, we can get into what is a person. Can an alien be a person? But the Solarians, I don't think, viewed the Krogan as people.
Right. They
viewed
were
them as tools.
They were a lower species. The same way that we would view, cattle or some people would treat, say, like dogs.
Or
like these
war horses.
Yeah, these are war horses. These are dogs. They're not people. They don't get a seat at the council. They don't help us make decisions. But we're going to use them for what we want. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. Like once you get to, like, we don't have the issue of living on a planet with multiple intelligent species. Like the closest things we get are things like dolphins and apes to humans, or elephants. Like they're close, but they don't actually have languages that we can really communicate well with. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not that back and forth. So we can't really invite them to the table because we can't really communicate. If we were in a platform where we were among other alien races that we could communicate with, and many of them were more highly intelligent than we are by an order of magnitude, would we be able to be okay with this idea that we weren't invited to the table? And we've talked about this a little bit on the last episode, but what if you can communicate? Can you at least be at the kids' table? Can you just be at the concepts are beyond our understanding, but at least let us try to learn, like how do you ramify that? Like, and is it wrong? Like if we were if human beings are in that situation, we make those kinds of decisions. We're destroying the planet regularly because we want the technology and the fuel to drive our cars and watch our TVs, and there are species on this planet that are dying because of that.
Yeah. If you were to caricature the conflict driven nature of humanity, I think you would get the Krogans. So I think that's kind of what they're meant to represent in a very allegorical way, that they have destroyed their planet through a nuclear civil war. And I think that's a lot of people's worst fear of the ultimate fate of Earth, right?
Sure.
And then, the Krogan are very, they're viewed as very aggressive, which humanity is viewed as after the First Contact War. They are prolific breeders. Compared to the Asari, humans are also prolific breeders because Asari live 1,000 years, so they don't have children that often.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things are parallels. However, the difference is that 26 years after the first contact war, humanity's already talking about getting a human Spectre and a human council person.
Right.
Let's remind people that these Rachni Wars, they call them the Rachni Wars for a reason. It's plural. It's wars. It's not one conflict. It's a series of conflicts, and they're protracted, and they're galaxy wide, and it takes like 300 years. So this isn't just, a 2-month debacle like the Relay 314 incident, as the Turians call it.
Uh-huh.
This
Right.
is a very protracted, very long, and very costly engagement. And the Krogans are just discarded after it. And so I think if you think of that before you go into the first game, you understand the chip on the shoulder that a lot of Krogans have. You understand why they're so angry and why they've resorted to merc work like Rex. Mm-hmm. I think like Rex has resorted to mercenary work.
I love Rex.
Why not?
Yeah. Oh, dude, such a good character. I love Rex. Every time I talk to Rex, I was like, oh man, this guy's great. Like, he's a big guy.
He's like one of the best.
And I was like, Rex, come with me on this mixed mission. Okay. Yeah. Commander Burton in chat says, how would we see Neanderthals, I think is actually the pronunciation. Everyone says Neanderthal, but I believe it's Neanderthal. And this is one of those concepts that I also think is really interesting. If you go back 20,000 years, there were something like 3 or maybe 4 intelligent humanoid species on the planet that we are aware of. Or maybe it's 50,000 years. Neanderthals were 20,000 years. The Denisovians, the race of the little people on one of the islands. There's a number of these different humanoid races that were active on the planet. Many of us have Neanderthal DNA. Australopithecus. Yeah. Australopithecines, I think, is that it? But many of us have Neanderthal DNA, which means that either willingly or unwillingly, we mated with them. It would be amazing. Like, human beings, for the most part, have been human beings for a very, very long time. Our genes are not that different than, say, human beings that were on the planet 50,000 years ago. Can you imagine sitting around a campfire with a bunch of people and there being a Neanderthal camp a mile down the road and listening in on the conversations about what those people were talking about and how they viewed those other people down the road that just happened to be a little bit burlier, a little bit more, stern looking, a little shorter. But those people down the road had fire. They had art. They even had ceremonies, just like we do. But they just look different. Like, I bet they didn't treat them very well. That'd be my guess. But it's a really cool concept because that's the closest we can get to the sense of being around an intelligent alien species. Did they actually group up? If you were in I love this concept. This is a concept that I threw around in my Myth podcast, which I don't do anymore, but if you want to go listen to it, it's still up. But like, let's say you're part of a community of humans in this kind of world, and you're out in the forest and you come across a Neanderthal child whose parents were killed by like a bear or something, and the child needs help. Do you take the child in and raise it like your own? Some people would, some people wouldn't. But what happens to that child if it's raised in a human culture? Does that Neanderthal child take on human traits? Does it learn our language? Does it then grow up thinking it's a person and just looks a little bit different, and then marries and mates with another human, and then now that DNA is passed down? Like, how does that work? How would this work in the case of, say, aliens? If we were to come across another alien species that somehow their planet was seeded with the same DNA strands or whatever that seeded our planet, and things evolved in a very similar way, and they have an ape-like species that is somehow like congruent to ours, do we accept them? What if it's not like that? I love these concepts. And Jessica Starr says, I'm certain that exact scenario probably played out many times, because if you think of the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have lived throughout history, those kinds of scenarios happen. What happens when one group takes over the other's camp? What do they do with the survivors? Do they keep them around? Do they enslave them? Do they murder them? Do they marry them? All of these things happen throughout history among different human groups. So why not humans and Denisovians or Neanderthals? I don't know. It's just alien matchmaking. Would it happen? It happens in the game. You can have romantic stuff go between you and these other alien races. But then, okay, do you invite that person to be part of the leadership council of your tribe? How does that work? Did it happen? Maybe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this stuff, because this stuff is mind-blowing. And the fact that it happens probably in human history among species that evolved on our planet and could happen again should we somehow realize that there's intelligent life out on the planet and we are able to interact with them. Like, what if we find a mass relay and all of a sudden we're plugged into the rest of the universe, just like in Mass Effect? How does that work? That would be amazing. Would we survive that?
I think it goes to show that, alien species, human species, no matter what, we're going to define ourselves by our differences to a certain extent, at least as long as we remain individualistic. And as long as we do that, we're going to focus on the differences and we're going to let that separate us. Yeah. Much like the Solarians did with the Krogans, and pretty much every other race did with the Krogans. Speaking of romancing alien characters, however, the Krogans are one race that you cannot romance throughout any of the Mass Effect games. Write your angry letters to BioWare.
Is it? Why is that? Because you're not necessarily sexually compatible with all of them, but you can be romantically compatible with a number of them, right? Like, did you just think that Krogans were not romantically compatible?
I'm not sure I want to go into the weeds there.
But like, that's got to be a thing, though, right? Like we're dealing with some of the races are like evolved from reptiles and fish and things like that. Like, we're not really. You're not going to have kids, and maybe your parts don't even work together. Who knows? But
and to be fair, the Asari, are largely asexual. Because despite their somewhat undeserved reputation as being promiscuous, the Asari, when they reproduce, it's through this like mind meld thing. It's not actually what you would think.
Yeah, right.
Even though they're humanoid.
Right.
Right. They kind of like if you ever saw Avatar, the movie, where they connect their ponytails, it's kind of like that.
The ponytail. Don't say that word. Oh my goodness. Ponytail. Yeah, there's that. Well, I've got all these questions. Maybe you guys can shine some light on this. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the Discord or on the Twitter account. Why don't we get to our reviews? We've got 5 reviews, 5 people to thank very specifically for leaving us reviews. You guys are amazing. Let's go through. We're going to go through chronologically. The first one here is from Kather Knox. Kather is one of our patrons on the Cyberpunk Lorecast. And Kather writes, finally here, 5 stars. This is the podcast I've been waiting for. Mass Effect was the game that introduced me into gaming. Can't wait to see where this Lorecast goes in the future. I'm Kather, and this is my favorite podcast on the Citadel. So I love that. I love that. Oh, and don't go anywhere, because we've got final words on this concept we've been talking about right after these. The second one says, lore. This is from Effect of the Mass from the United States, who writes, great lore, great show hosts. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Then we have, and both of these are from the US. Then we actually, all of these are from the US. Then we have Seth A993, who writes, love Mass Effect, 5 stars. I really like the Mass Effect games, but at the time they came out, I didn't much care for sitting there and going through all the codex pages. I just wanted to fight the aliens threatening the galaxy. As I'm older and have more of an interest in the lore now, this podcast is perfect for that, and I can't wait for the Mass Effect remaster so I too can hopefully start diving into the codex myself. Yes, I am on the same page as you. Then Teacup, who we talked about already, wrote, great concise information. I first listened to Robots Radio Podcast recently with the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Tom does a great job, thank you, of presenting a large world with complicated lore in a concise way that is accessible to all. And the same is true for this podcast. Listening to this podcast has enhanced my understanding of the Mass Effect world and has increased my enjoyment of the series so much that I may even consider giving Andromeda another try. Oh, there you go. All right. You hear that? You hear that, game design people out there? We're selling copies of your game. Or at least getting people to play them more. Then one more, we have Blixa the Cat, who writes, I love Mass Effect. I really enjoy this lore series. I am a huge Mass Effect fan, so when I heard there was a new lore series, I gave it a try. 2 episodes in and I'm hooked. I am looking forward to learning even more about the lore of the series before it comes out, and even before LE, the Legendary Edition, comes out, and eventually the new game. Yay, listen to it. You won't be disappointed. So thank you to all of you guys. This is huge. This is, especially with the new podcast, really, 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 really helps get us out there on the charts. Anybody else who wants to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, all you need is an Apple account or an iTunes account, and you're able to do that. So we would love the help. So, so Sam, you've got some final thoughts on all of the stuff we talked about. What do you think?
I do. We covered a lot of ground. So the Rachni Wars, as I said, they lasted hundreds of years. They're very long, costly, and protracted. And kind of as a safeguard, the Council leaves listening post X-19 just to monitor if the Rachni are going to come back, which, they don't, because there's no sapient life detected for thousands of years there. So any service members who get an assignment at listening post X-19, they're like, this is awful. This is like boring.
They're sending us to the wall.
Yeah,
I'm going to the wall.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. And so
reference.
I'd like to put a caveat on the whole, no sapient life is detected part. Because for anyone who's played Mass Effect 3, spoiler alert, the Rachni aren't dead. They're there. And there is still a Rachni Queen. And so as that safeguard goes through, the Council forms new laws. And one of those new laws is against reactivating dormant mass relays. As I mentioned earlier, that is the law by which the Turians derive their authority to fire at humanity starting the First Contact War.
Right.
And just for perspective, these Rachni Wars, they lasted longer than the United States has existed.
Yeah,
that's how long
you
they
mentioned
lasted.
300 years. Yeah, like that's I don't know if of any. There's no continuing conflicts, active conflicts that come up to mind historically that last anywhere near that long that I'm aware of.
The only one that I looked up, and I was curious.
Yeah.
The historical side of my brain was curious to see if there were any real life wars that lasted longer than that. And the Reconquista actually lasted longer than that. It lasted about 781 years. Those were wars between the Moors and the Catholic Spanish Empire. It lasted about 781 years.
And it stayed active that whole time? I
don't believe so. I think it was a series of conflicts.
Right. So I guess it depends how you define it, right? Like,
yeah, not one solid campaign.
Right. Yeah, like something like World War II effectively lasted like 4-ish years. But that's because we were actively at war for 4 years, and then there was no more war. So I have to wonder. This is one of those things. I don't know if you're a historian out there and if that other conflict was active for the entire time. That would be amazing to find out. Okay, so any other final thoughts?
Yeah, so this all kind of begs the question, if the Rachni are so intelligent, why were they so aggressive? Why did the Rachni, without provocation, wage this prolonged galactic war against people they just met?
Right. And they're intelligent. Queen, so, yeah, like, right. There must have been a reason.
They're super. Right. They're a rational species. Even though we don't quite understand them, they're rational. And so if Shepard gives the Rachni Queen the time of day to speak to Shepard in Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 3, if Shepard spares the Rachni Queen says to Shepard that the Queen doesn't know why the Rachni went to war. In fact, she only heard the sounds of, quote, oily shadows and a, quote, tone from space that hushed one voice after another and, quote, forced the singers to resonate with its own sour yellow note. Sounds a lot like the Reapers to me.
It sounds a lot like manipulation, like they were not acting under their own choice.
That's exactly what it sounds like. And it sounds like indoctrination, which, there's already ample evidence that the Reapers did that. And we know that the Reapers wanted to orchestrate the progression of how intelligent life interacted with each other so that they got to a predestined outcome. I think this could very well be one of the tools that the Reapers use to do it. There is a competing thought, however. If you played the Leviathan DLC in Mass Effect 3, Dr. Garrett Bryson says that the Doctor thinks it's actually because of Leviathan, not the Reapers. So the organic beings which created the Reapers might be trying to form an army of the Rachni. They were trying to form an army of the Rachni to take on the Reapers. That was Dr. Bryson's point of view.
As kind of like a counter to the Reapers.
Mm-hmm.
That might
do know that the...
Go ahead. I've got a thought here, but go ahead.
We do know that the Leviathan can take control of people and indoctrinate them, similar to the Reapers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a thought. If it's the Reapers who are trying to sow discord across the galaxy in order to make us easier to clean up later, and the Rachni were so successful at taking on whatever they took on because they were just this overwhelming force, then they wouldn't have really been the best choice for the Reapers to use for this, because had that actually worked, they would have taken over the galaxy and proliferated and been a much more difficult thing to take over than a bunch of feuding individual species, right? So if it was the Leviathan, then having a formidable like the entire galaxy filled by an extremely formidable hostile force that could then fight against the Reapers would actually be the better solution.
Unless the Reapers also kind of influenced the genophage and the uplifting of the Krogan.
Oh yeah, that's true.
That was a very divisive topic.
Yeah, which maybe they went too far, and so they influenced the pivoting of it back, a solution that created more division among the different races. You got that could be a thing too,
right? Because if you're trying to destabilize a region, you favor both sides.
Right. You act like Palpatine and you raise an army of robots and an army of clones, and then you have them fight each other. Did I bring up Star Wars last time? I don't think I did. Oh, you know what it was? I made a Jar Jar reference on the Fallout Lorecast, and then everybody got mad at me. And I was like, sorry. And then we moved on. That was during the pre-show stuff. Anyway, I do so many shows. They all get mixed up in my head. So very cool concepts. Again, I would love to hear some of our listeners' thoughts on this stuff, because like a lot of these things, there's just like, what's your take on it? What do you think? You could go either way. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sam, what do we have coming next week?
So I already hinted at it a little bit. What we have coming next week is we're going to be talking about the genophage and the Krogan rebellion that happens. That is a very deep, very divisive topic within the Mass Effect universe. If you're wanting to learn more about how did the genophage come about, how does it affect the Krogans, and how does every other race react to the genophage, then tune in next week, because we're going to be diving into that pretty deep, and we're going to be diving into the Krogan reaction to it. Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Do you have anything else going on you want to share before we head out? Yeah. So I have been streaming, albeit a little bit less frequently this past week. As I've said, I'm trying to coordinate a move to the West Coast, but I am going to be streaming more of Mass Effect 1. If you're interested, give me a follow on Twitch. That is still Kung Fu _kangaroo. Still need to change that. But yeah, give me a follow and set up the notification, because the next time I'm going to be streaming, it is going to be Mass Effect 1. We are going to be picking up where I left off with my Shepard, Commander K. Shepard, and Samesh Bhatia is the current quest that we're doing. We're going to help him find out what's going on with his wife in Mass Effect 1. So nice. Awesome. That sounds fun. I've got my regular shows happening. If it has Lorecast in the title, it's probably one of mine, unless it says selectives. That's not mine. But Fallout, Elder Scrolls, Cyberpunk, Dungeons and Dragons, and then this one. So if you are into any of those other games and you want some more lore, then go check those out. You can check out all the shows at robotsradio.net for my shows and everybody else on the network. And my big thing lately has been working with our Rocket Club shows. This is like a
a group of shows inside the network in their own sub little group that I have been mentoring. And we just hit our 10th Rocket Club show. These shows are awesome because they are creators who are looking for help with growing their shows, with creating their shows, help with marketing, content creation, all of the kinds of stuff that I've been focusing on for a number of years now. And it's so fun to help them grow their shows. And they are doing an awesome job. A lot of them are even just a few weeks in and they're already more than the average podcast listener or podcast gets for listeners. And the numbers that they're doing are awesome. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're thinking about creating your own show and you want some guidance on that and some help and to be with a group of people all doing similar things and working with that group, then check out the Robots Radio Rocket Club. So robotsradio.net/rocket-club is where you can go check that out. I'd love to have you on board and to be working with you to help you launch your show. So that's what we've got going on. And thank you for tuning in. Twitch chat, thank you for being here. I love all the comments during the show and all of your different thoughts that you're sharing. And Sam, thank you for joining me again. We'll have a good week, buddy. hope you guys have a good week. And until next time, usually I just make this up on the fly, but Sam created this one. Try not to unleash super intelligent, hostile insects on the rest of the galaxy, because I would just that's no good. It's on that list of things not to do. Don't do that one. Always have a towel. We'll talk to you guys next time. See you later. Thanks for tuning into the Mass Effect Lorecast. We'd love to hear your opinion and thoughts on the lore of Mass Effect. Reach out to us on Twitter at Mass Effect Cast or check out the Robots Radio Discord. Also, you can send us an email at masseffectlorecast@gmail.com.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.